All right, welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and definitely high-scoring sections of the UPSC psychology syllabus: sensory, attentional, and perceptual processes. This is really where the magic happens. It's how the outside world actually gets inside our minds.
But here's the big question, the one every single aspirant faces. The syllabus is huge, right? And these concepts can get pretty tricky. So how do you cut through all that noise and focus on what the examiner really wants to see on your answer sheet? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
So here's our game plan. We've got a clear 6-part roadmap to get you totally exam ready. We're going to start by cracking sensation and the absolutely critical signal detection theory. Then we'll navigate through the filters of attention, see how our brain builds reality with perception, and then, this is the best part, we'll pull it all together by getting inside the examiner's mindset. Okay, let's jump right in.
First up, sensation. You got to think of this as the bedrock, the foundation for everything else. It's that initial raw process where our sense organs, our eyes, our ears, our skin, are just gathering up information from the environment. It's basically the data input phase for your brain.
Okay, so our senses aren't all powerful, right? They have limits, and these limits are described by 2 key thresholds. The absolute threshold is the absolute minimum amount of energy you need to even notice something is there. Like, what's the faintest whisper you could possibly hear? Then you have the difference threshold, which is all about change. It's that just noticeable difference, like when your friend turns the music up by just 1 notch and you actually notice it.
But here's the thing, real-world detection is way more complicated than that. And that brings us to what is arguably the single most important concept in this entire section for your exam: signal detection theory, or SDT. It's a game changer because it says that spotting a faint signal isn't just about your sensory ability. Nope, it's a full-on decision-making process, and it's influenced by things like your expectations, your motivation, and the consequences of being right or wrong.
And this matrix, this is the heart of SDT. It perfectly lays out the 4 possible outcomes. A hit? That's when you correctly say, yep, the signal's there. A miss? You failed to notice it. A false alarm is when you think you saw something, but nothing was there. And a correct rejection is when you rightly say, nope, nothing to see here. The entire job of an airport security officer or a radiologist lives inside this very matrix.
And look at this, a question pulled straight from a recent paper. It directly connects SDT to vigilance, which is just a fancy word for sustained attention. And trust me, this is not a one-off. Questions on SDT pop up again and again. The examiner wants to see that you understand how a person's decision-making is affected when they have to stay alert for a long, long time. This shows that really, getting SDT isn't just a good idea. It is absolutely essential.
All right, so that brings us perfectly to our next topic: attention. If sensation is all about data collection, you can think of attention as the data filter. It's the cognitive process that selects which of the millions of bits of information coming at us we actually get to process and become aware of. Now, attention comes in a few key flavors. You've got selective attention. That's the classic cocktail party effect, where you can tune into one conversation in a super noisy room. Then there's sustained attention. That's the vigilance we were just talking about, like an air traffic controller staring at a radar screen for hours. And finally, divided attention, which is basically multitasking. And as we all know, that only really works well when at least one of the tasks is so practiced, it's almost automatic.
What's really cool is seeing how our understanding of attention has evolved over time. See, at first, Broadbent proposed this really strict bottleneck idea. Only one message gets through, period. But that couldn't explain how you could still hear your own name from across a crowded room. So, Treisman came along and tweaked it. She said the filter doesn't block other signals, it just attenuates them. It just turns down the volume. Then finally, Johnston and Hines gave us a much more flexible model, saying we can choose where to put our filter, early or late, depending on what the task demands.
So what about our capacity? How much can we actually hold in our attention at once? Well, you've probably heard of this one. The famous answer comes from George Miller, the magic number 7, plus or minus 2. Our immediate span of attention is actually pretty limited, which is exactly why things like phone numbers and license plates are broken down into smaller, manageable chunks.
And again, just look at how directly this stuff is tested. The UPSC exam is not trying to trick you. It wants you to know why selective attention matters, and it wants you to be able to walk them through the evolution of these key theories. They've even asked why earlier theories like Broadbent's just weren't good enough. Knowing this story, this progression, is crucial for a top-scoring answer.
Okay, so we've gathered the data with sensation, and we've filtered it with attention. What's the final step? Perception.
This is the active, creative process of organizing and interpreting all that sensory info to build a meaningful model of the world. This isn't just seeing, this is understanding. So how does this actually happen? Well, psychologists basically see it as a two-way street. You have bottom-up processing, which is totally data-driven. You're building your perception from the individual sensory pieces from the ground up. And then you have top-down processing, which is concept-driven. Your expectations, your memories, your knowledge all shape how you interpret those pieces. The truth is, in the real world, we're constantly using both at the exact same time.
Okay, check this out. This classic image is the perfect way to understand the most fundamental rule of how our brain organizes the world, all thanks to the Gestalt psychologists. It's called figure ground. Your brain just instinctively, automatically separates a figure, whether it's the vase or the two faces, from the background. And you can't see both at once. It's the very first step in creating order out of sensory chaos. And the Gestalt folks didn't stop there. They gave us a whole toolkit of mental shortcuts our brain uses to make sense of the world instantly. We tend to group things that are close together. That's proximity. We group things that look alike. That's similarity. We prefer to see smooth, flowing patterns over broken ones. Continuity. And our brain automatically fills in the blanks to see a complete object. That's closure. And boom, here's the perfect application question. It's not about memorizing definitions, it's about seeing how they work in the real world. Think about an air traffic controller. They're using these principles constantly. They use proximity and similarity to group aircraft on their radar. They use figure ground to separate a plane's icon from the background map. These aren't just abstract theories. These are life-saving tools.
Okay, let's go another layer deeper. Our brain doesn't just organize the world into neat objects. It gives it a third dimension. And sometimes, get this, it even perceives things that we're not even consciously aware of.
Just stop and think about this for a second. The image that's actually hitting the back of your eye, your retina, it's flat, it's two-dimensional, like a photograph. So how in the world do we experience this rich, three-dimensional world full of depth and distance? The answer is that our brain uses this really clever set of tricks called depth cues. And these cues basically fall into two camps. You've got monocular cues, which work with just one eye. These are all the tricks that artists use in paintings, right? Like making parallel lines seem to converge in the distance. Then you have binocular cues, which require both of your eyes. The big one here is retinal disparity. Each of your eyes gets a slightly different view of the world, and your brain brilliantly fuses those two images together to create a sense of depth. Now, what about perceiving things we don't even consciously see? Well, that's subliminal perception. Stimuli that are presented so quickly or faintly that they're below our absolute threshold of awareness. And as this very recent question shows, you need to be ready to discuss its real-world role, especially the whole controversial debate about whether it actually works in advertising. This topic, along with things like perceptual defense, is a recurring favorite for examiners.
Okay, deep breath. We've covered a ton of core concepts. Now for what I think is the most important part. Let's put it all together and figure out a strategic approach. Let's get inside the examiner's head and see what they really want from you in your answers.
So if you remember nothing else, remember these 4 things. First, watch out for the plasticity trend. Recent questions keep asking about how our experiences shape perception, so be ready to discuss that nature versus nurture debate. Second, application is everything. That air traffic controller question proves it. Don't just define it, apply it. Third, understand the story behind the theories, like the evolution from Broadbent to Treisman. And finally, I can't say this enough, signal detection theory is non-negotiable. You have to know that payoff matrix inside and out.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to really crystallize your thinking. Go beyond just listing theories. Ask yourself, how could an air traffic controller use all of these things together? Vigilance from attention, Gestalt grouping from perception, and depth cues. How do they all integrate in a single high-stakes moment to prevent a disaster? Answering that is the kind of critical, integrated thinking that's going to set your paper apart from the rest.